was a tragic and violent weekend in the United States and also abroad, but there was some joy for 123 political prisoners in Belarus. I traveled to Belarus to see these 123 prisoners get released in a deal brokered by the United States and Special Envoy John Cole, who happens to be my husband. But what does Belarus get in return? I'm going to tell you about that. But while in Belarus, I also interviewed Alexander Lukashenko. He is the Putin-backed president of Belarus, and in the 31 years he has ruled Belarus, he has done it with an iron fist. Few Western journalists have ever met him or interviewed him. I had a wide-ranging discussion with him. Part one is later in this hour. Also had it happened again, a massacre of Jews, this time in Australia. Jews were celebrating Hanukkah when they were targeted by two gunmen. Those gunmen, a father and a son, and now back home in the United States at this hour, a manhunt is underway. Police are frantically looking for the person who killed 2, wounded 9 at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. All this while 2 U.S. service members and 1 U.S. civilian were killed in a terrorist attack in Syria. President Trump is threatening to retaliate. National Security Correspondent Carla Babb joins me. Carla?
Hi, Greta. The Iowa National Guard now identifying the 2 soldiers killed in the attack as Sergeant Edgar Brian Torres Tovar, 25 of Des Moines, Iowa, and Sergeant William Nathaniel Howard, 29 of Marshalltown, Iowa. An American interpreter was also killed. Officials say a lone gunman fired on Americans supporting counter-terror operations in the Syrian city of Palmyra. Syrian security forces then killed the gunman, who Syrian officials say was a member of the Syrian security forces, who was slated for dismissal based on his extremist views. U.S. officials say 3 American military personnel and 2 members of Syrian security forces were also wounded in the attack. 2 of the Americans were medevaced to bases in the region and are now in stable condition. 1 American was treated locally and remains in good condition. President Trump has vowed to retaliate.
I can tell you in Syria, there will be a lot of damage done to the people that did it. They got the person, the individual person, but there'll be big damage done.
The deaths marked the first American casualties in the country since the fall of former dictator Bashar al-Assad last year. The new Syrian government has taken a strong public stance against Islamic State and pledged to join the U.S.-led counter-ISIS coalition in November. There are still about 1,000 American troops helping with the counter-ISIS fight in Syria. The U.S. withdrew hundreds of troops from northeast Syria earlier this year, and President Trump has expressed he would like to pull more out. U.S. troops entered Syria in 2015 to fight Islamic State, and after the terror group's territorial defeat, several hundred troops have remained in Syria to help local forces keep the terror group from resurging. Greta.
God, just horrible. 2 of the National Guard from the state of Iowa. It's just terrible. Carla Babb, thank you. Pennsylvania Democrat Senator John Fetterman joins me. Good afternoon, sir. And it seems like every time we talk, there's some horrible terrorist attack on Jews. We have Australia, and we have events here at home. What are your thoughts about what's going on around the world in the terrorism against Jews?
Oh, well, I mean, I agree for our American soldiers that were killed in Syria, and then too, and that's a sad reminder that's incredibly dangerous to serve and defend our country in there too. And now what happened in Australia, if you are starting to hear from more and more from members of the Jewish communities in Australia, they've been warning the kinds of escalating kinds of anti-Semitism there in that nation. And then, our key ally like Australia was now acknowledging of a 2-state of a solution for Palestine. So for me, it's astonishing that after 15 people were targeted and killed and over 40 people wounded, and people there, just all they were doing is on the beach celebrating about Hanukkah. So that reminded me, like back in my hometown of Pittsburgh, the Tree of Life massacre back in 2018. 11 people were killed, just in their synagogue, and they were targeted simply for only being Jewish as well too. Anti-Semitism is a global scourge, and it continues to escalate and spread in areas, whether it's Australia or whether on our college campuses all across our nation as well too. And it's entirely appropriate to push back and stand and call it exactly what it is. And that has been part of the accelerant is social media, and places just like TikTok have turned an entire generation in our nation against Israel.
You know, though, that for many, October 7th, 2023 was a wake-up call, although this was brewing much earlier than that. I'm not suggesting that was the beginning of anti-Semitism at all. But, I mean, we've had all these problems. Whatever we're doing to solve this bigotry, this horrible hate towards Jews and all the terrorism, it's not working. Is there anything else other than standing up and saying this is bad? Yes, we know it's bad, but we are not getting a grip on it. We're not doing anything because we're seeing it all the time, and it's the Jews who are targeted. You know, it's so often. I mean, there are other targets, of course, in other places, you know, incident, but the level of attacks on Jews, you know, greatly overshadows the other attacks, it seems.
Yeah, well, I mean, words matter. And if you have constant, huge protest and you terrorize, for example, on our campuses in our country, and now early on, the Trump administration targeted Colombia. Colombia, absolutely, it's entirely appropriate now too. And some of the changes they made, and they did a study, and not one single Middle Eastern professor, you know, has positive Israel views. They are all anti-Zionism. There's not one. There lacks any kinds of intellectual diversity in that entire department. And that demonstrates that it's a hard left anti-Israel bias, and that has polluted our entire generation, and that continues to build in all these constant protests. In Australia and other nations in Europe had tens and tens of thousands of people protesting against Israel, and that's the manifestation when people were executed just on the beach celebrating Hanukkah.
You know, but the anti-Semitism and words matter. I agree. The media is very powerful, and you know, in terms of, you know, there's social media, and then there's also legacy media. Is the American media is it doing its job in terms of trying to? I mean, I realize we have the First Amendment. We're supposed to, you know, stimulate discussion on different issues, put a spotlight on what's happening. But is the media doing its job to try to stamp out this horrible terrorism towards Jews?
Well, I mean, I read virtually everything on the, you know, like the mainstream outlets like the New York Times is constantly a strong anti-Israel views on those things, and other media as well too. Call it what it is. And now here in my own party, I've been incredibly disappointed, you know, and people are trying to pretend these kinds of words and terms like, you know, from the river to the sea, or to globalize the intifada and all those other things. We all know what this means, and I refuse to pander to that. And now for me, it's been a rot, you know, within the American left and within my party. Call it what it is and stand with Israel, which is the one nation in the region that lives and protects those kinds of values that we live in. Sorry, go ahead.
I'll never forget the time I was live on the air, and there was someone went into cafes or something in Tel Aviv and was shooting people up, and it was live, probably right as it's happening, and I called the person a terrorist. And the next day, I got so many calls from people thanking me for calling it a terrorist, and I thought, what else would you call the person who did something like that? You know, it's like, you know, the whole idea of someone going into a Jewish community and shooting up Israelis. I mean, what else would you call it but a terrorist? It didn't even take any thought. It just, you know, it was an easy one.
Well, yeah, I agree. That's what I'm saying. Call it was, and don't deflect, and just acknowledge exactly what it is. And now here, you know, there's possible peace in the region, and now why some of our key allies like France or Australia and others, why would they acknowledge Palestine as a two-state solution even before Hamas even formally disarms and demilitarizes all of their? How can you rebuild Gaza if you can't even have Hamas excluded and destroyed and disarmed through that? Why would you provide the kinds of reward after massacring all those people on 10/7 and giving them with a two-state solution when they are even unwilling to disavow violence and to disarm at this point.
And indeed. Senator John Fetterman from the great state of Pennsylvania, thank you, sir.
Well,
And now
thank you.
to Los Angeles. And now to Los Angeles, where director, actor, screenwriter, and political activist Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle, were found dead in their home. Investigators believe they were stabbed. The Reiner's 32-year-old son, Nick, has been arrested and booked on suspicion of murder of his parents. Rob Reiner is known for directing films such as A Few Good Men, When Harry Met Sally, and The Princess Bride. Rob Reiner was 78 years old. His wife, Michelle, was 68. Coming up, you're going to see the incredibly heroic video of a man tackling a terrorist, risking his own life during a mass shooting. That when the record continues.
Whenever news breaks.
A lot of destruction there. It was really the front lines in the battle.
And wherever it happens.
Humanitarian corridors opened up this morning.
We're trying to go rescue a 96-year-old lady that doesn't have anybody to take care of her.
They're using ingenuity. They refuse to give up.
It's incoming fire. Come on. Yeah, let's get down here.
Newsmax is there for you. What a day in college football.
This is the playoff. Nothing here will be easy. There will be comebacks and upsets, dynasties and dark horses. So lean in, flip out, and strap in for some campus chaos.
It's hard to top this.
12 teams, one epic finish. This is the wild world of college football. First round coverage of the college football playoff begins Saturday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern on TNT and HBO Max.
Now it's a great time to play Solitaire Grand Harvest and enjoy a new world of solitaire. Brr, a cold world. This Christmas, discover all the holiday fun with exciting features from Santa. Like our winter tournaments, festive mini-games, and challenging levels. Ever built a farm in the snow? 'Tis the season to turn classic into fantastic. So download Solitaire Grand Harvest for free and see for yourself.
What are phytonutrients? They are naturally occurring plant nutrients that give fruits, vegetables, spices, and fibers their vibrant colors, unique flavors, and distinct aromas. Balance of Nature supplements include 47 different ingredients of fruits, vegetables, spices, and fibers. It's an easy way to give your body more of a variety of phytonutrients that might be missing from your everyday diet.
Go to balanceofnature.com and get the whole health system at our best price for life.
Australian police confirm a father and son are the primary terrorist suspects in yesterday's mass anti-Semitic shooting and killing. They targeted a Hanukkah celebration at Sydney, Australia's Bondi Beach. Middle East correspondent Zach Anders is in Tel Aviv, where it is 11:17 p.m. Zach?
Hi, Greta. The dead include a 10-year-old girl, several rabbis, and a Holocaust survivor in his 80s. 15 are dead in total, with 42 others taken to hospital, including 2 Sydney police officers. Witnesses describe the terrorists ushering away other beachgoers, focusing their attack solely on Jews. Sydney police say one of the attackers, the father, 50 years old, was killed on scene, that he arrived in Australia in 1998 on a student visa. His 24-year-old son taken into custody alive but in critical condition. Australian media reports have named the accused attackers as Naveed and Shahid Akram, with the son reportedly investigated by the state in 2019 for terror ties. Obviously, a lot of scrutiny going into their overseas travel as well. Now, more than 1,000 were in attendance for the Hanukkah by the Sea event celebrating the Jewish Festival of Lights. Witnesses describe a wave of people running down the beach to escape the attackers. In several videos, the terrorists can be seen retreating to a high point on a pedestrian bridge, continuing their attack with what officials believe were bolt-action rifles and shotguns. And despite this tragedy, there is a hero. Ahmed Al-Ahmed, a 43-year-old fruit shop vendor. You can see him here. His son says he was out to get coffee when the attack began. He runs into action, disarming the youngest attacker here, taking the gun away. From the the son before the eldest attacker, the father, shoots Mr. Ahmed in the shoulder. His family says Ahmed is still recovering in hospital. He has been hailed as the hero of Bondi Beach, with President Trump stating that he saved many lives. Synagogues across Australia packed to capacity last night. Memorials growing today. Now, this afternoon, I spoke with Joel Burnie in Melbourne. He shares Australian Jews have been warning of rising anti-Semitism across the country and that those calls were ignored. Yet in the Prime Minister's press conference last night, he took time to highlight what his government has done in Australia to combat anti-Semitism.
15 innocent Jews were gunned down in one of the most popular public places in this country under his watch, just for being Jewish. And the chutzpah and the audacity of the Prime Minister to list the things that he's done in some type of attempt to placate responsibility for what happened. Ultimately, even if he did 100 things or 150 things or 200 things, it fell short. 15 innocent Jews were gunned.
Now, here in Israel, candlelight vigils overnight in Tel Aviv. Israeli President Isaac Herzog calling out the vile terrorists and calling out Australian leaders for failing to address, quote, the enormous wave of anti-Semitism that is plaguing Australian society. Now, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is stating that this was an act of evil, anti-Semitism, of terrorism. However, the Australian leader is using this moment calling for tighter gun control in response. And this is the largest mass shooting in Australia since 1996. Greta.
Zach Anders, thank you. And keeping your faith in the worst conditions, that is unimaginable to many. Newly released video from December 2023 shows 6 Israeli hostages celebrating Hanukkah. One of those hostages was Israeli-American Hersh Goldberg, Poland. Despite being held underground in a terror tunnel, the hostages lit the menorah, sang and embraced the Israeli government, says Hamas took the videos for propaganda purposes but did not release them. The IDF recovered this footage. The 6 hostages were executed 8 months after this video. The Israeli Health Ministry said they were shot at close range when the IDF closed in on their location. Coming up on Saturday, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko freed 123 political prisoners. I spoke to the key negotiator, President Trump's special envoy to Belarus, John Cole, how this happened. That when the record continues.
Hey, I'm Carl Higby from Newsmax. Look, I'm unapologetically pro-American, and honestly, this is the one place that lets me call it how it is. I'm not holding back. I'll give it to you straight every single night.
At Viasat, we believe every family deserves connection. Satellite internet that's fast, reliable, and installed by professionals. For work, for play, for every day. Plans starting as low as $39.99. Available anywhere you call home. Visit Viasat.com/savings or call 8335-VIASAT to sign up today. That's Viasat.com/savings or 8335-842-728. Viasat, internet without limits.
Hurry in for huge savings going on now at Motorhome Specialist, now with 2 locations. Shop and save on over 1,000 motorhomes, starting at $69,995, only at Motorhome Specialist, the #1 motorhome dealer in the world.
Derriere, caboose, booty, badunkadunk. No matter what you call it, if you have hemorrhoids, your tushy is no laughing matter. So don't use a cream that treats your rear end like a joke. Get serious relief with Recticare Advanced Hemorrhoidal Cream. Recticare Advanced is seriously effective with 2 powerful medicines for rapid dual-action relief, soothing the uncomfortable swelling, itching, and pain of your hemorrhoids. For serious hemorrhoid relief for your buns, get Recticare Advanced.
Falls are the #1 cause of injury to senior citizens. Falling downstairs can be disastrous. Acorn Stair Lifts has the solution. Just don't fall. Sit, relax, ride with an Acorn Stair Lift, the world's leader in stair lifts. That's right, don't let limited mobility keep you from going up and down your stairs, even outside. Call Acorn Stair Lifts now for a free information kit and no obligation quote. Now you can safely ride with your Acorn stair lift.
Now I don't have to worry about him climbing those stairs anymore.
And our Acorn stair lift was very affordable. Our Acorn stair lift is definitely more affordable than moving.
The Acorn stair lift has a padded seat and backrest for maximum comfort. It easily folds up for access to the stairway. 5 safety sensors stop your Acorn stair lift if there is something in the way. And it even runs during power outages.
I am king of my castle again.
You'll be working directly with the world's leader in stair lifts. That's right, there's no middleman. Acorn's trained technicians professionally install your stair lift directly to the staircase. In most cases, in 2 hours or less. There's no need for special construction. We don't leave until you're completely comfortable using your Acorn stair lift.
Don't risk a serious fall going down the stairs.
I was really surprised at how little it cost.
Call for your free no-obligation information kit and quote from Acorn Stair Lifts. Just don't fall. Safely ride up and down your steps.
Give your life a lift with Acorn stair lifts.
Call 1-800-908-4077 right now for your free information kit or visit our website today. That number again is 1-800-908-4077. Call now.
In a nod to President Trump on Saturday, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko freed 123 political prisoners. One of the prisoners freed was Nobel Peace Prize winner Ales Bialyatsky. He got that prize in prison for opposing Lukashenko. So in releasing him, Lukashenko released his enemy. In return, the United States agreed to lift sanctions on Belarusian potash. Potash, of course, is a key component in fertilizer. Full disclosure, my husband, John Cole, is the United States Special Envoy to Belarus. He helped broker this deal between the U.S. and Belarus to free those 123 political prisoners. I spoke with John inside the United States Embassy in Lithuania just hours after the prisoners crossed over the border and out of Belarus. I'm here at the U.S. Embassy in Vilnius, Lithuania. And as my mother would say, and my person I'm going to interview really knew my mother very well, look what the cat dragged in. Here I am in Lithuania, and I'm here with my husband, John Cole.
Hi.
Hi. Hi. Okay, you're the special envoy to Belarus. Tell me what happened today.
Well, first of all, I have to tell you that none of this would have happened without the 100% support from President Trump and Secretary Rubio. They have supported this mission from day one with 100% support. What we did today is in the last 2 weeks, we've gotten 152 prisoners released. Today it was 109 released. 100 of them went to Ukraine for logistical reasons. Plus it's closer to where they were, and 9 came with us today. This has been going on since early April, and we've gotten about 300 out.
Well, what you're not saying, I mean, that's sort of the public thing to say, but basically, I'll tell the behind the scenes. You've been living and breathing this, and I've been hearing about this for, I don't know, it's been around the clock since April when you made your first trip. I mean, it's been nonstop. It's just been an incredible journey. These people have been stuck here, some in prison since what, 5 years? More than 5 years?
Yeah.
And you know, some of them. I was struck when I watched them get off and greet you. Some of them hugged you. Some look shell shocked.
Yeah, it was. This has been a couple times I've opened van doors, and people who most of the time thought they were in the van and taken away from prison to be shot, and then they see this face opening the door and say, "You're free." It's very emotional. They are very emotional, of course, but it's something to experience. And this happened, I think it was April 1st. I get a call from somebody at State Department. Would you go to Belarus and get this American out? We got it all arranged. I said, sure. When do I leave? They said, tomorrow. I said, damn. And
so did your wife? because
Right.
your wife didn't expect it either.
No.
It was a little bit of a surprise to both of us, and you went. But it's stunning because they're not even told where they're going for the most part. When they get taken out of the prisons, they could be taken to their execution.
Well, most of them thought that, and there were no executions.
None,
so,
zero.
Right. So it was something to see.
What's Lukashenko like?
We get along very well. Usually we meet for, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours and talk about everything. He's very good friends with Putin and Chairman Xi of China. They've all been in power a long time. And even the guy down in Venezuela, Maduro. They know each other. They talk on the phone. He tells Putin some of the things I say from the administration. And as most old friends, which they are, they talk about once a week, Putin and Lukashenko. He gives advice, and Putin either takes the advice or doesn't, like you would with any old friend.
It was interesting today, when I was privy to some of the conversation, is that President Lukashenko really takes the cue from President Trump. I mean, this is a complete departure. I mean, there's been an effort to get these people up, but President Trump has really made an impact on Lukashenko, it appeared.
Well, President Trump's different than as we all know, any world leader, and just goes right into the mix with world leaders, with anybody, as everybody has seen. And President Trump thinks his job is to get it done, whatever it is. And that's the same way, I think, with Lukashenko, most of these people that lead their countries, but not like Trump.
Well, a little behind the scenes, you and I met in 1979.
Yes.
Both lawyers, I was doing research for you, paying $10 an hour. Thank you for that. I was just gotten out waiting for the bar result. But the funny thing for me, like full circle here, is that we've both practiced law for a long time. So here we are sitting in this U.S. Embassy in Lithuania when what you hired me to research, and the reason I know this is American soil, and the embassy is basically the United States here, is because you hired me to do research on whether the U.S. Embassy in Iran was American soil. I was just some dumb kid out of law school.
And I was representing a bunch of the hostages that were taken back then.
So here we are here we are in an embassy.
Yeah.
Anyway, life is strange. Anyway, I know they all thanked you, so I'm not going to thank you, but the people here are thrilled. Obviously, it was fun to see that American flag driving up.
Yeah, it really is. And it's really, to meet these people who are freed is worth everything. It really is.
One's a Jersey girl from New Jersey. That was fun.
And we have a Nobel Peace Prize winner we got out today who'd been in there 5 years. He got the Peace Prize while he was in prison. He's very grateful. I was with him when he called his wife that he hasn't seen in 5 years and spoken a few times to. It was something else.
Yeah, imagine receiving that phone call, the family receiving the phone call, I'm out. Because when they're first taken into the cross point between Belarus and Lithuania, at the Lithuania checkpoint, the cell phones were given to them to make phone calls.
Yeah, and half their relatives didn't know they were getting released, or more than half.
Probably all of them.
And all of a sudden they're home getting a phone call. I thought you were in prison.
Yeah, anyway, it's fun. All right, well, congratulations to you, to President Trump, the State Department, to the embassy. It's been a heavy lift, and there are more to come.
And Rubio.
Oh, and Secretary of State Rubio, of course. Yes, of course, the Secretary of State. The United States Embassy in Lithuania had a big role in helping to free these political prisoners, and you're going to go behind the scenes of your embassy at work for you when the record continues.
It's true. I am an America First, liberty-loving Latino. That's why I know this country is worth fighting for. That's why the Chris Salcedo Show will always tell you the truth.
The Chris Salcedo Show, for the news you need to know.
There are only a few men I'd trust with my life. 2 of them built this wallet. I've known the guys behind Proof for nearly 20 years, and we've been through hell and back together. When they told me they were building the wallet, I just said, bill me now, I'm in. This isn't some fashion piece. This isn't just some trend. These wallets are a direct reflection of the kind of men who built it. It's built to last, built to function, and designed to carry everything you need and more. If anything happens to it, they'll take care of it. No questions, no fine print. If you knew the guys who created this wallet, you wouldn't carry anything else. Go check them out, because they built this thing right.
Hello, everyone. It's President Donald J. Trump, and it's Trump time. Check out this red beauty. It's one of my new watches. Wear it proudly on your wrist, and everyone will know exactly what it's for, who it represents. It's really going to be something special. It's for your favorite president. Get your watch today at gettrumpwatches.com. These make a great gift. It's Trump time.
You woke up with a sore throat and a low-grade fever. You know you are getting sick, so here's your choices. You can get sicker and miss work. Try to see a doctor this week or sit hours in a crowded waiting room at urgent care.
I have a smarter option for you. Open your medical emergency kit. Match your symptoms to doctor-recommended prescription in your booklet and take the right meds now and get well faster.
This is not a first aid kit. It's like having an urgent care in your home. It includes doctor-prescribed medications to treat over 39 medical issues like respiratory infections, strep throat, pneumonia, UTIs, and more.
No waiting to see the doctor and no standing in line at the pharmacy. It's right here.
Every home should have at least one medical emergency kit, and here's how to order.
Order online and save $45. Your kit to treat dozens of common and serious illnesses is rushed to your door. Visit urgentcarekit.com/news, promo code NEWS. That's urgentcarekit.com/news, promo code NEWS.
Think of all the places that could expose you to identity theft. If something happens, LifeLock provides a dedicated US-based restoration specialist with expertise to make the right calls and take the right steps to fix your case, start to finish. In fact, we're so confident restoration is guaranteed or your money back. Don't face identity theft alone. Protect your future and finances with the leader in identity theft protection, LifeLock, for the threats you can't control.
Hey guys, Viagra is not your only option. Rove Sparks act fast and stay active longer. They aren't pills. Sparks dissolve under your tongue to reach your bloodstream for speedy results. Connect with a provider at rove.co/sparks.
When Betty and George switched to consumer cellular, it saved them a lot. So they started splurging on date night. No, don't you dare. It's an acquired taste. Right now, get your second month free. Call Consumer Cellular.
Not again.
Your cold is coming! Your cold is coming!
Thanks, Revere.
We really need to keep Zycam in the house.
Only if you want to shorten your cold. When you feel a cold coming, shorten it with Zycam.
You may not know what your embassy does for the United States, but this is one small example. They were critically important to handling the release of political prisoners from neighboring Belarus. I spoke
at 9:47 a.m. on the 20th of February, 1962. Lieutenant Colonel John Glenn Jr. of New Concord, Ohio, found himself sitting on top of an Atlas 6 rocket filled with 600,000 pounds of fuel. At liftoff, 360,000 pounds of thrust hurled the massive rocket and its occupant into space and America's history books. John Glenn became the fourth human being to enter space and the first American to orbit the Earth. For his remarkable heroism, President Kennedy awarded Colonel Glenn NASA's Distinguished Service Medal.
As our knowledge of this universe in which we live increases, may God grant us the wisdom and guidance to use it wisely. Thank you, Colonel.
Glenn went on to become the United States Senator from Ohio, and in 1984 ran for the Democratic presidential nomination, but lost to Walter Mondale. When Rosa Parks stepped on that Montgomery, Alabama bus on December 1st, 1955, she didn't set out to make history. She just wanted to get home. Montgomery's segregated buses had divided seating, white passengers in front, colored passengers in the back. When the bus driver needed more seats for his white passengers, he ordered her and 3 others to vacate their seats. The others complied and moved, but Rosa quietly refused and was quickly arrested. Working alongside Dr. Martin Luther King, Rosa's arrest sparked a highly effective citywide protest with African Americans boycotting city buses. Rosa's protest and resulting boycott didn't end segregation. But it sparked a movement that ended the racial system, paving the way for a more equal society. You're watching An American Moment. In the early morning hours of May 2nd, 2011, the Central Intelligence Agency launched Operation Neptune Spear and set into motion a mission to bring one of the world's most notorious terrorists to justice. All indications were that Osama bin Laden was asleep as the U.S. Naval Special Warfare Development Group, known as SEAL Team 6, approached his highly secured, three-story Pakistani-based compound. When located in his living quarters on the third floor of his compound, the head of the Islamist group Al-Qaeda was found using his young wife as a shield. The Obama administration reported the 54-year-old terrorist was given a traditional Islamic burial at sea. 9 years, 7 months, and 21 days following his infamous attack on New York's Twin Towers, killing thousands of innocent civilians, its mastermind, Osama bin Laden, was dead. It took 34 years to build, but on August 15, 1914, the Panama Canal was officially opened for business and was quickly crowned one of the 7 wonders of the modern world. President Theodore Roosevelt believed the completion of the canal was essential to American security and prosperity, so he negotiated with the French to purchase the canal's properties and dredging equipment. But when negotiations with Colombia over a canal treaty broke down, Roosevelt backed a local bloodless revolution that lasted only a few hours. And on November 3, 1903, the nation of Panama was born. With the opening of the Panama Canal, the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans were joined, reducing a ship's journey from New York to San Francisco by 9,000 miles. Roosevelt's vision made the canal a reality, and the feat helped make America a world power. You're watching An American Moment. At 9:47 a.m. on the 20th of February, 1962, Lieutenant Colonel John Glenn Jr. of New Concord, Ohio, found himself sitting on top of an Atlas VI rocket filled with 600,000 pounds of fuel. At liftoff, 360,000 pounds of thrust hurled the massive rocket and its occupant into space and America's history books. John Glenn became the 4th human being to enter space and the first American to orbit the Earth. For his remarkable heroism, President Kennedy awarded Colonel Glenn NASA's Distinguished Service Medal.
As our knowledge of this universe in which we live increases, may God grant us the wisdom and guidance to use it wisely. Thank you, Colonel.
Glenn went on to become the United States Senator from Ohio, and in 1984 ran for the Democratic presidential nomination, but lost to Walter Mondale. Exactly 6 years and 6 months after the first shots of the Revolutionary War were fired at Lexington and Concord, General George Washington had spent most of the war evading fixed battles against the superior armed British forces. But Providence intervened. Lieutenant General Lord Cornwallis, commander of British forces in Virginia and second in command of all British forces in the American colonies, had moved into a trap, setting up camp in Yorktown. Located on a peninsula and facing the York River, Cornwallis was easily encircled by Continental Army troops on one side and a powerful French fleet on another. On October 6th, Washington's army, now reinforced with 5,500 French troops, were making preparations for their planned assault on the 9th. At the same time, a French fleet, numbering 28 ships of the line, had prevented any chance of a British escape by water. By mid-month, the British were cut off from their supply lines, denying them much-needed food and ammunition. With his forces suffering heavy casualties from Washington's continual artillery bombardment, and knowing his reinforcements were still weeks away, Lord Cornwallis did the unthinkable. He surrendered his forces to what had been called a band of rabble, effectively ending America's war for independence. The date was the 19th of October, 1781. With the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1783, the war officially came to a close, with America's sovereignty secured and its territories bordered by Canada to the north, Florida to the south, and the Mississippi River to the east. I'm Bill Curtis, and this is an American Moment.
President Trump in many things, because Venezuela is very close, just like Ukraine is very close to Russia. So there are interests in many areas. I am absolutely convinced that all issues, all the interests and desires of the United States of America might be resolved and can be resolved peacefully. I believe that in the nearest future we will be able to discuss this topic with President Trump, and I will tell a lot of interesting things to him about it. Everything can be achieved peacefully. War will give you nothing, and I told that to Mr. Cole yesterday. War, I told him that it will be the second Vietnam, and you don't need the second Vietnam. War is unnecessary. You can achieve the results by agreeing with each other.
Let me go back to the election in Venezuela. The United States does not recognize Mr. Maduro as the president. If he leaves the presidency of Venezuela, I don't know that he is, but if he leaves the presidency, would he be welcome here, President Maduro in Belarus?
These elections were not recognized not only by the United States, and the United States of America did not recognize any elections under Biden, for example. Maduro has never been our enemy or adversary, never. If he has such a desire to come to Belarus, we have the doors open for him. But I am absolutely confident that we never spoke about it. Maduro is not a person to give up and to run away. He's quite a strong person. He is the Chavez supporter, and he is very much like Chavez. He's a very strong man. He's a normal guy with whom you can talk, with whom you can communicate and agree upon things, and I absolutely confident about that. I know him for a very long time, since his youth. That is why I see the journalists discussing these topics. They discuss our relations with Maduro and the plan for him to come here to Belarus to live, but we never spoke with Maduro on such a topic. We discuss this topic with Americans more often. We speak about Venezuela with Americans more often than with Maduro about his leaving his post and coming to Belarus. He's a hero, you know, and there are millions of Venezuelans, strong people supporting him. Yes, of course, just like in America, you have 50-50 situation. And Maduro won with only a slight advantage. But if you want to unite the Venezuelans around Maduro, and I think that President Trump and Americans don't want this, but in such a case, there can be a war, and this is a situation that must be prevented. If you didn't recognize the elections Okay, let it be. Venezuelans did not have these elections for the Americans. They held this election for themselves. They know the results. They recognize these results. They have no other results. I don't believe that you counted the votes instead of the Electoral Commission. We are not the Americans to count the votes. Just let us remember, when Trump lost the election, in America people found the ballots on streets and people were voting by post. So when Biden won, there were a lot of problems with the elections in America as well and the results of the elections. And today the Americans with such an experience do not want to recognize the elections in Venezuela or Belarus. Okay, you do you. You cannot recognize the results.
What should the United States do about the drugs that come out of Venezuela and go to the United States?
Are you sure that there is such a flow that you are talking right now?
Where are the drugs coming from if they're not coming out of Venezuela? But they're coming, fentanyl is coming through Mexico, and other drugs are coming from Venezuela, coming originally perhaps from Colombia or other South American countries, but coming up through Venezuela.
Greta, yesterday with your husband and your delegation, we discussed this issue. Drugs, just like many other things, human trafficking, prostitution, weapons. This is the sad reality, and we must fight it. But missiles are not the means to fight drugs. If you start a war and fight against drugs and illegal migration is a good fight, and President Trump is absolutely right to do that. He said that we'll fight illegal migration and drugs, and even when we leave our posts, Trump, me, your John, our kids will stay to deal with this issue after us. This is a new issue for a new era, but you won't fight it with missiles. We must find ways to talk to each other.
So what do you recommend? If it's not fighting with missiles, I'm not saying that the missiles is necessarily working, but how would you do it?
We fight. We do fight. So I would like to give you an example. Like in Belarus, we do it. And yesterday, during the negotiations, I provided the same example. So what we are doing, we have the Asian East, and from Asian East, we see the flow of drugs to Russia, to Belarus, and through our countries to Europe, this famous paradise. So there is this flow of drugs. Why is this happening? Because in Europe they use drugs more often and in larger quantities than here or in Russia. So there is a demand, great demand. That is why the drugs are going there. At our border we have a very strict control. We can argue for a time and we can try to compare us with anybody else, but you won't find anyone who fights drugs as strictly as we do. We start this fight from the inside. If someone is involved in drug trafficking in the Republic of Belarus and he is convicted, he won't be released from prison ever. So everything is very strict. I am personally controlling this issue. Of course, we alone cannot stop this flow of drugs from the east to Europe. But what the Europeans are doing, they impose sanctions on us, they close down the borders. But tell me, my dear Greta, if you have this loop around your neck that strangles you, would you have a desire to protect those and help those who decided to execute you? So why I must protect Europe when Europe strangles me? How can I protect them from drugs if they are trying to kill me? So here is the same thing with you. Do not strangle Venezuela. Try to find the way out of the situation, because we do. We try to discuss this issue with our neighbors. And together with our Lithuanian, Latvian, Polish neighbors, we tried to fight this issue together. We apprehended tons of drugs and we burned them at the borders. But now we have this confrontation and I won't protect them. What is more, they are bringing synthetic drugs to here. Do you understand the difference between the natural and synthetic drugs? This is a terrible thing. And we get tons of such drugs. And yesterday I provided this example to your American delegation. We apprehend tons of synthetic drugs from Europe. So this notion, this thing, is not only the Venezuelan problem or Afghan problem. This is a global problem with which we must fight together, but not using missiles, but with the new methods. We must fight with the roots of these problems to deal with the plantations where the drugs are being cultivated. We must think what we are to do, but not fight with each other. Greta, I do not believe that such a volume that comes to the United States of America comes from Venezuela only. I don't believe it.
Do you think that President Maduro is involved with drug trafficking himself? Because he's under indictment in the United States.
You don't have such facts, and I don't have such facts as well. We don't have proofs. I don't believe it. Maduro is not a drug addict, and that's for sure.
It is extraordinary that President Lukashenko of Belarus has released his political enemies. It's just extraordinary. This hasn't happened before. For years, people have been trying to get these people out of prison. He has locked up so many people that didn't agree with him politically. So we've talked to him about a number of other topics. Today was obviously one part of the interview. Tomorrow, we're going to play another part of the interview. I'm sorry for the technical problems that you saw mid-show, but you're also going to hear from, tomorrow is the ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to Lithuania, because not only was it the special envoy, my husband, John P. Cole, who helped get him out, and the president's influence, but also the Lithuanian embassy and the ambassador. So tune in tomorrow, 4 p.m. Eastern. We look forward to playing more of my interview with the president of Belarus.